you share this with people, please,
Please.
because as Father, Ripperger, you mentioned at the beginning, a lot of people don't even know that this exists. They have no clue that this document, that this formulated plan has been in the works for decades now. So please, people, share this with other people so people can know that this list exists of this whole strategic move to undermine not just America, but everywhere else in the world too. Welcome, everybody. This is the U.S. Grace Force Podcast. I'm Doug Barry, along with my very good friend, the always amazing, and now in a new studio, Father Richard Heilman. And more to come on his new studio. It's exciting. It's got a great rug. It's a Green Bay Packer rug. We'll deal with that later, though. But tonight we got with us Father Chad Ripperger. This is going to be awesome. Before we get started, though, let's begin with a prayer. Father Heilman, we always turn that to you.
Sure. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our defense against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly hosts, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Father. And of course, we always thank everybody out there who supports the U.S. Grace Force Podcast, especially with your prayers. And we hear quite often of people who say that they're praying for us, and that kind of encouragement means everything to us. And of course, the spiritual aspect of that is beyond our understanding. So thank you all for your prayers. Please keep us in your prayers. It means everything to us. And for those of you who support us through your Patreon contributions, that also is an enormous way to help us out with this. You can click the link in the description below if you're interested and would like to help us out with a few dollars a month. That's a big, big way of helping us continue to get these messages out to as many people as we can. We always want to reach as many lives and souls as possible. Don't forget to subscribe to this, and also please share this information with other people. We've got things growing with the U.S. Grace Force. We've got some exciting news coming up in the very near future, and we're excited to share that with you all as this unfolds. But for now, we want to get to this particular topic, and we brought in Father Chad Ripperger with us, and we're very thankful. Father, thanks for joining us tonight.
Oh, it's always good to be with you guys.
Father, again, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for being a great friend of the Grace Force and all that you do. Before we start, too, I just wanted to make sure right at the beginning where people are made aware that we are doing something that's been very powerful. We've discovered this over the years. I think we've been doing it since 2016, but it's called the 54-day Rosary Novena for our nation. And you can find out by going to usgraceforce.com. You can also go to rosarycoasttocoast.com. It will culminate with our National Rosary Rally, which we always have on the Sunday nearest to October 7th. So it goes from August 15th to October 7th. And it's basically pray a rosary with us once a day. And but we also, if you sign up if you listen to the U.S. Grace Force, you'll be on our email list. And you'll get not only the prayers that go with the rosary, but also you'll get a basic training in holiness. So just a short little nice training in holiness. And just to let everybody know too, having said basic training in holiness, I am transitioning into giving my complete attention and effort in that area. I always talk in this moment where Ronald Reagan said, we maintain the peace or strength. Weakness only invites aggression. We're weak and we need to get strong. And we're facing a lot of challenges right now. We're facing really, I believe, a trial. I think you'd agree with me, Father. This is a trial period, and we've got to become strong during this time. And so we also want to understand exactly what's going on. And I've been using the word Marxist as, synonymous, I guess, with communism. But tonight's podcast is really looking at what are called the 45 goals of communism. We're going to try to get through as many of those as we can with you, Father. But you could just Google it too. Look at those 45 goals and tell me this isn't what we're facing in our culture. And that'll all unfold as we are on this tonight. But it is mind-boggling to see just how closely knit those goals are to exactly what we've been facing over these years since 1963. So, Father, maybe we could open up by you kind of helping us understand what are these 45 goals? Where did they come from, and how are they important for us to understand in this moment in history?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, first, by way of introduction, so if you look at behind Doug is, of course, the Our Lady of statue of Our Lady of Fatima, and Our Lady of Fatima, of course, she said at Fatima that unless the consecration of Russia actually occurs, that many of the nations would be annihilated. Well, I think that for the longest time in America, we just presumed that didn't apply to us because we were anti-communist for the longest time, and we would fight these types of things. But the communists set out to infiltrate the United States and to actually begin the process of shifting it and changing it into a communist country, as early as the teens and 20s. I mean, just almost immediately as soon as they gained control over Russia. And this is which, of course, we know from Bella Dodd's discussion about how the communists basically took over like the NEA, which we'll see here a little bit later, but and a variety of different other institutions, and that their goal was, is eventually to turn the United States communist. And this is, of course, on the back of the fact that they were also trying to turn the church communist by getting communists into the seminaries, in which she said they were wildly successful. Over 1,000 seminarians were communists got into the seminaries, before even Vatican II, before any of this was actually going on. But so if you take a look at this is actually part of the congressional record. It was actually a list that was introduced. I think it comes originally from the book The Naked Communist by Cleo Skousen, who, if people haven't read that book, if you really want to understand that book, he actually wrote a trilogy: the Naked Communist, the Naked Capitalist, and the Naked Socialist. And each one deals with a different thing, but the Naked Communist is really basically what you start to find out is that, because his real question is why is it that all these rich people, that's the question he's answering in this, why is it that all these rich people are basically they push communism? And so he kind of answers that question. Well, in his book, he introduces into congressional record, and it was actually read on the congressional floor on Thursday, January 10th of 1963. He read these out loud, and as you read them, you begin to basically realize that the communists had achieved their goal by and large. There might be one or two here that they didn't fully achieve, or it wasn't really done, but in the end, they were wildly successful. And so that's kind of the general kind of the introduction of that's where it has come. So even in this country, but by the time, as you start to read through this, and as you read Skousen's book, what you begin to realize is that the communists had already infiltrated the certain sectors in the government already, especially the administrative side of the state, which we would call the deep state, or the state that's the kind of like the parallel government that is along with the elected government. Well, they had already kind of gotten in there and being appointed to those. And so by the 40s, for example, they're already affecting decisions made by the United States regarding war decisions during the Second World War. They had tremendous impact in thwarting our efforts during the war in Vietnam and a variety of other things from inside our own government. But I think it would be good if we just went through, obviously we're not going to cover all 45, but if we just covered just even a few of these, I think people would get a sense of the fact that, part of this trial that we're going through is the fact that the United States is not immune from the warning that Our Lady gave at Fatima, that we too could be annihilated if we're not careful and we don't take the moral route. As you read through these, you basically begin to also realize that in addition to an attack, that the communists were trying to attack our governmental and religious and educational institutions, they were also trying to erode and destroy the moral fabric of our society, which we see through some of these.
Well, I think that's important to remember too, Father. I mean, you just made mention of that. When you look at the Bolshevik Revolution and the things that took place over in Russia in 1917, when the revolution began, there was a lot of it wasn't just a government for state run. It was an effort to really tear down some of the most necessary and important moral foundations and pillars of a country.
That's right.
Marriage, family, the dignity of the human person, and so forth. So that was a big part of it. So when we see the abortion debate and problems with trafficking, human trafficking, and these types of things that just baffle why there aren't certain things that are already, established to prevent these things. Well, this goes part and parcel with what we saw back in 1917 with the Bolshevik Revolution. Is that accurate, you think?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And so once they got into Russia, then as soon as they got into Russia, got ensconced and got set up, they immediately, and this is one of the things that Skozin talks about, they immediately set about trying to influence not just the United States, but a number of different countries through a variety of different means. And so this is because the thing with communism is it's not satisfied with its own little sphere. It's a drive for power. And so they want to basically take over everything.
Yeah, which I think also, I'll throw this in real quick too, is those people for example, in America who don't like American values, call it more conservative Judeo-Christian values, and people will say, well, look, if you don't like this, then just leave the country and go somewhere else. But their goal is not that they just want to go somewhere else; they want to change this country.
That's right.
Into what is anti-Judeo-Christian values. Is that
right.
Spot on, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the same thing within the church. It's like, well, look, if you don't want to believe what the church believes, why don't you just leave? Well, no, they want to change the church from within.
Right.
So, Father, should we start hitting these? I mean, do you want to start with just number one of 40 the 45?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first couple there's, I wouldn't go through all of them because some of them are just,
okay.
I'd like to try and hit more of the stuff that I think that will really resonate with people. I mean, obviously all these, like the first one is U.S. acceptance of coexistence as an alternative to atomic war. That actually did begin to happen, especially during the Cold War and things like that. But I think that some of them, which will immediately resonate, is like number 4, permit free trade between all nations, regardless of communist affiliation and regardless of whether or not items could be used for war. So basically the idea is that, and this is why we see so many of the free trade agreements and everything that are actually going on that are deleterious to our own country financially. And this would be one of them. Provide American aid. One of the things that people complain to me about is, why is our country giving money to everybody all the time? And this is part of their goals. So number 6 was provide American aid to all nations, regardless of communist domination. Here's another one, which I've always could never understand why in the United States it was never outlawed. Communism was never outlawed because it's so contrary to the fabric of our society, our nation, our laws, even our Constitution, etc. But number 12, which is resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. And so now what I find interesting is that even though what we see a lot in the current election cycle is just basic communism, it's just rebranded or repackaged, and it's not called communism, but that's essentially what it is. But nobody is even allowed to even use the word communist. Once in a while, you'll see a conservative pundit use it, but generally, people don't even talk about the fact that what we're dealing with is communism. It's not just just a few progressive or liberal ideas. No, it's a structured plan to basically change the very nature and structure of this society.
Which is incredible when you think about currently right now, and we don't make our shows political, but considering the topic here, one of the choices for VP, and I think everybody will understand who this is when I say this because it's been clear in the press lately. He said one man's socialism is another man's neighborliness.
Right.
And how do we not just balk at that? But you're right. We've been convinced over time. And this, again, for the audience, remember, this was read in 1963. So here we are, how many years later, dealing with that? You can't resisting the attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. Well, now we've got people running for some of the highest offices of the country stating things like that very openly, and that would it not normally then, Father, in the past at least, cause people to say, well, there's absolutely no chance that this person can be in this position, and yet we see what we see now.
I have a long and a short answer. You want the long or the short one to that?
Whichever is more entertaining.
Well, the long one I think is more informative.
Oh, let's do that one then, yeah.
Okay, so I think part of the difficulty runs to this. Over the course of the last 40 to 50 years, we have been conditioned to follow our emotions. As a result of that, facts, reality, and the truth take a lesser seat to our emotional response to things. What that has done is conditioned people psychologically to accept a lesser argument, authentically speaking, because the fact that these might be emotionally difficult topics doesn't take away from the reality of the situation. Reality trumps your emotions, right? And so what's happened is over the course of time, people have begun to accept a lesser argument over the greater argument as a matter of course. This is what you see constantly. I'll give you a couple of examples. For example, they'll tell you, you can't drive your car because it's causing global warming. Now, the fact of the matter is that, and the fact is that the global warming isn't a sufficient reason to shut down people's livelihoods, shut down, people's. They're literally telling people you can't have gas stoves because it's causing global warming, or it's causing this, or it's causing that. But literally everything that they propose, the argument they propose, is a lesser argument. If you actually analyze it, it's a lesser truth or lesser good than the one that they're actually detracting against. This is why I always say that every time communism gets involved, there's a degradation of people's quality of life. It's inevitable because of this psychological aspect to it. Now, if you read Plato, he talks about that the definition of sophistry is making the lesser argument appear the greater. And that's what we see constantly in the news media. So for example, one guy gets caught with stolen valor, but then what they do is they shift it to, but he was just and then they give an excuse or a reason which is far less than the totality of the stolen valor, right? So there's this constant thing that's actually going on in that, and that's what communism always does. Communism always uses false or lesser arguments, but makes them appear like they're serious, and you've got to really be looking at this and this is far more important than anything else that we're facing. This is going to be the extinction of humanity if we don't do, that kind of thing. And so they trump this stuff up when it's actually the lesser argument. And so it's basically just sophistry. And that's what we're seeing across the board, I think.
That's a great point, Father.
One can look right at number 15, capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. I think we're seeing that right now. But it goes on. Right after that is number 17, gain control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum, get control of teachers' associations, put the party line in textbooks. That's what's going on right now, isn't it, Father?
Well, there's two things to that. One is that Bella Dodd had talked about that in the book School of Darkness, that they had basically taken over the NEA by the 30s or 40s already, right? So by that time, they had already had that institution under their control. And then what we saw is, even though we saw blips of it when we were in, the current generation that's coming through, both the millennials and then the ones that are under them, they were fully indoctrinated in this stuff. And this is why when they hear this stuff, it seems to resonate for them. It makes sense because that's what their training is.
I'd throw in there too, Father Heilman, number 13, it ties in with 17, get control of the schools, but do away with all loyalty oaths. We've removed Pledge of Allegiance and some of these things. No loyalty to the country, no loyalty, and now, of course, in recent years, we've got the...
I remember when you couldn't fly a flag in your yard. For fear your house was going to get burned down. Do you remember that?
Yep, that kind of stuff. Or all the athletes who were taking a knee at a sporting event. So that's happened as well. That's all. I mean, and that's become such a contentious point, something as simple as the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, I think that, in relationship to the schools too, and this is something that we're seeing even in relationship to the universities. I mean, by and large, you talk to a lot of the people that are professors in universities, and they'll basically all admit that, a large percentage of certain departments are basically all just Marxists. And so you see this, they basically gain control of the schools, which is actually a stroke of genius. And then of course, 18, gain control of all student papers, but then that's connected to infiltrate the press, get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, and policy making positions. So they pretty much got into the press at this point, because the press, whenever it comes to something that is Marxist in nature, they just kind of either promote it or they just kind of glum over it, and they just want you to hear it, but they're not going to necessarily address it because they know it's too jarring to you if they really go whole hog into it.
Can you address this real quick? The press, that's the big one. They've gained control of Hollywood, TV, movies, public schools, but the press is mainly. I just don't get it, Father. I don't get why they're in lockstep. Is this a lot like the term "useful idiots"? And is it because they're being rewarded or they'll be punished, or is it a combination, that why they're in such lockstep with this socialist communist movement that's fast taking control of our country?
Yeah, and from the reading that I've done, it seems to me that it's kind of all of the above. It's everything from, this is how these people were trained, this is what their mental habits are, this is their patterns of thinking, so that it just goes right along with the way that they think, and so they think this is a good thing. So there's the formation issue. Then there's also those who want to just cause mayhem and difficulty, and so they actually use these forms of media in order to promote those things. So here I'm talking about people who are just malicious, they're bad intent. And then, of course, there's the people who have become intellectually convinced of it. So when you read Bella Dodd, in the initial stages, she becomes intellectually convinced of it. But over the course of time, she begins to realize that this is completely not the case. If you've ever watched Thomas Sowell, one time he was asked the question, well, why did you stop being a Marxist? And because Thomas Sowell he's a genius. I mean, he's one of the most intelligent political and economic commentators that I've seen in a long time. And he just said, well, after I got out of college, I was a Marxist. Then I went to work for the government, and I realized these people are incapable of solving anybody's problems. So that's when he stopped being a Marxist. But I think a lot of it is just kind of this hopium, as they used to call it, or it's kind of this kind of a religious kind of a thing where there's this utopia that they want to strive for, this ideal, and so they're willing to sacrifice everything and everybody to get to this thing. And so I think it's just people who have become intellectually convinced of it. So I think there's a variety of different reasons.
Mm-hmm. Father, I'm curious. We did a film for BR Coalition called "Doomed to Repeat It," and the idea behind it is, if that famous quote, if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. And we interviewed a woman named Lala Mooney, who was 19 years old, was in Cuba when Castro took over, 1959, 1960 time period there. And she describes her family being, lined up by the communists when they came in and started rounding people up in their homes and separating by age, and all like 12 on up or 13 on up were taken off to prisons and so forth. And in that film, though, that we did, we had Jason Jones, and Jason Jones, we interviewed him, and he talked a little bit about kind of the useful idiot idea. And his whole point in this, what I'm bringing up here, is there are the higher ups, the people up there, the names we know, who, whether it's somebody who belongs to this elite group or that elite group. But he said that the real problem, and while that is a problem, are the unbelievably high number of literally unknown people who are playing these pieces, librarians, church council members.
That's right.
I'd like your comment, if you could, on that. The reality that we've got to fight this battle on the local level, by even our school board members and our church group committees and such. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think there's two parts to this. One is that at the federal level, I'm not so sure how much can be done, because they basically, from all appearance, they seem to have infiltrated virtually every area of government, from all intents and purposes. But the thing is that a lot of that stuff can be mitigated or even blocked to some degree by making sure that people do get involved at the lower levels and start getting good, solid people, even in the positions that don't seem to have a whole lot of influence. I think one of the geniuses that you would see with certain politicians historically is they knew, for example, that if you flooded the middle tier of the judiciary with basically Marxist communist people, they could block all the lawsuits coming up. So you could do anything you wanted, be completely lawless, and get away with it because you knew it was going to get blocked at that middle tier of the judiciary. And rarely did stuff get up to the Supreme Court. And so they knew that if you just did that. So, the point being is that it's not necessarily the highest levels that are the most important in certain circumstances, although it can be, but it's usually, very often it's at the lowest level. But one of the areas that, as you know, is one of the most important positions in any county is the sheriff, because he can actually determine whether any law he's going to implement or not, whether federal or local, state, or what have you. And so that position is very key, and I'm surprised they never went after that, probably because they just figured it's not that important. But Anyway, but yeah, no, I would agree with you. A lot of these people are hidden, and they have been from the very beginning. And that's the whole point of the infiltration, right? That they got themselves into these positions. And, this isn't just even in the civil authorities, this is even in the church. You see that these guys got into various positions and then they worked their way up, and then now they're in there. This strategy, which is one of the reasons I think it's almost quasi-diabolic, is the fact that these people managed to infiltrate, remain largely occult, that is hidden, in the process of doing it. And then they were able to cause all this damage under the guise of all sorts of different excuses like, oh, well, we want to help the poor, we want to do this, or we want to do that. And they got in there and they started causing all this damage. And now we're to the point where it's almost impossible to rein it in, even within the church. Here's another couple that I found kind of interesting is use student riots to foment public protests against programs or organizations which are under communist attack, which I suppose you could just say they just use them in general, but that's connected to the next one, which is 22. Continue discrediting American culture, which they always do. Communists, in order to impose their system, you always have to destroy the national identity, and so you got to get rid of the culture. So continue discrediting American culture by degrading all forms of artistic expression. An American communist cell was told to eliminate all good sculpture. Sound familiar? From parks and buildings, substitute shapeless, awkward, and meaningless forms, which is what we saw in the church, right? You go into the church and you literally look at the statue and you're like, what is that thing? You can't even figure out what it is.
I look at number 23 and, look at our church to start with, but you can look at all kinds of architecture. You drive down the street. Yeah, I just drove through a classic old town. And I went, what happened? These beautiful buildings are still standing there, and now we have these monstrosity block is ugly. But here's 23. Control art critics and directors of art museums. Our plan is to promote ugliness, repulsive, meaningless art, and you can apply that to architecture as well. Yeah. But they called that brutalism. Actually, the type of art and architecture, brutalist which means get back to your animal basics. Don't have anything that's beautiful. Your animals. Right. And that to me, Father, it seems like that's really at the heart of communism: is get people to stop believing they're anything but another animal species. Right?
That's correct. And the other thing you want to do is make sure they don't have any high-minded ideals, because that's going to be at variance from the communist way. Because anybody who is high-minded is going to start thinking for himself, and you can't have that in a communist country.
Yep.
Right. So the next couple ones I think are also things that will really resonate with people. So I'm just going to read the next three. So 24, eliminate all laws governing obscenity, calling them censorship and a violation of freedom of speech and of press. And then 25, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV, which obviously is just, in fact, as you probably know, one of the biggest funders of pornography in the United States in the late 50s and early 60s was communist Russia. They were flooding the United States with money to the pornography industry to get it up off the ground. In fact, I think it's even Hugh Hefner's mother admitted that she got a big whopping check from the communists to basically start the Playboy. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. That we've been seeing in spades. Yeah.
Was it 1973 when I forget the DSM, or I'm saying this incorrectly maybe, threw out the definition of homosexuality as disorder and made it more of an alternative lifestyle, something to that effect? Is that correct, Father?
Yeah. Well, so in the DSM-3, it was actually considered not a dysphagia. It was considered a what do you call that? When you get disconnected from reality, a dissociative disorder. It was actually considered a dissociative in the DSM-3. The homosexuals got in there and got it removed, so that in the DSM-4, it's not even considered an aberration psychologically within the context of the DSM.
Right. I'm curious if you could. I'm going to back up on a couple of these here, whether it's the obscenity or the meaningless art, promote ugliness, promoting basically cultural standards, morality. pornography, obscenity, books, magazines. So, as a psychologist, Father, what does this do to the human mind and the human heart when it comes to just being surrounded by ugliness and things that have no meaning? Can you give a little more context to what it does to us when we go through our lives and things don't have meaning or depth? We can't even discern what a statue or a picture is supposed to be.
Well, I think it does in the end, and this is something which one of my assistants had relatives that lived in Poland, and they said that the men in Poland under communism had zero joy. They had no reaction. They were very phlegmatic. They just didn't care about anything. And I think what happens is that when you flood people with stuff that's ugly and that type of thing, we find it repulsive, right? So we don't actually pursue it. The part of the beauty is that it draws us to contemplation, which again is another thing in which it actually helps to enlighten the mind, and it actually helps the mind to grow and to pursue truth and knowledge and beauty, etc. So it does that, and so that's one of the things that they actually don't want. And I think it gets back, I think, a little bit to what Father was saying. It's the brutalism of it all, where they just want people to basically live like animals because you can control animals. You can't control a human being. You can control an animal.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, one of the things that just tears at my heart, speaking of ugly, is you're driving along and there's this beautiful landscape, rolling hills and woods, and then these big metal windmills. I just feel like that's all part of the communist plot to insert ugly into our beautiful landscape.
Yeah, well, being from Wyoming, in Wyoming, they're putting those things all over the place, and they tend to put them. They do tend to put them in places.
Ugly.
Yeah, they are. They tend to put them in places that have a lot of wind, but they're also some of the most beautiful areas, and they destroy the skyline. Just destroy it.
Yeah,
I know.
Just tears me apart. Father, we now get into how they infiltrated the church. So number 27, infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with, drum roll please, social religion. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious church, but a social religion. I mean, if that doesn't sum that up, right?
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if you saw this. This was about 2 or 3 years ago, but the communists in Russia actually admitted that they were the ones who started liberation theology in South America. They admitted they were the ones who started. Oh, geez.
Really?
Yeah. And so you're just like, and they were the ones who promoted it. And right there it is. But that's actually what we see even in this country in large part, where priests are more worried about the social side of how we appear and things of that sort than they actually are about leading a Catholic life.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's to me, when I see social religion too, it's a denial of the supernatural, the transcendent. It just feels like, these 45 were put out in 1963. Well, Vatican Council. I'm not anti-Vatican II. What I'm anti is what I believe is those that have a strong Marxist, communist bent to them took control after Vatican II, right or wrong. That's what my observation. I mean, Father, can you comment? Because it turned it's literally stripped out beauty. It stripped out anything that predisposed us or prepared us to lift our soul up to Almighty God in awe and wonder. It just stripped it all out and turned us into a social religion. And it just seemed like that was just so strong. I just read an article from National Catholic Register, and it was well done, but it talked about Archbishop Fulton Sheen talking to this in 1974. And he says, we're heading into a crisis right now, but he would point to things like this is the way that, in essence, I can sum up what he said, that we're turning into a social religion and we're denying the divinity, we're downplaying it, we're watering it down. Father, what does that sound? Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I think it does in general. I mean, I think that the problems were obviously percolating even before the council, and even because there was the infiltration before the council, but that the council in a certain sense became the catalyst in the sense that people used it as the excuse
Used
to
it.
push everything they could possibly get
Yep.
through.
Yeah,
And so, it's you'd hear the things of, the spirit of Vatican II. And, being an exorcist, I'm like, well, there's all sorts of different kinds of spirits here. So let's be more specific here. But the point being is that that they used it as the excuse. And again, that's another one of those, one of the signs that you could actually see that communism had gotten into the church again, because of this whole sophistry business. There was so much sophistry that was being done in the church, making the lesser argument, oh, well, we can't do that because it might offend the people. Well, hello, the more important thing is we're offending God, right? They would just completely ignore that and make this little thing seem like it was really important. And so you see this happening over and over again, even in the church. Go ahead.
No, you, Father.
I was just going to mention number 28, which is connected, that eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the ground that it violates the principle of separation of church and state, which is kind of interesting because, as you know, there is actually no document of this country that actually states that there's to be separation of church and state. It just says that the state can't establish any particular religion.
Yeah, and the Constitution is filled with one nation under God, and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we see that they've done that. Here's one that we're seeing recently in the last 5 years. The next two, actually, discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, and out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. And then 30, discredit the American founding fathers, present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. Actually, what they did is they started accusing them of, which is some of what was actually true, is like, well, they were slave owners, or they were this, or they were that, or what have you. But yeah, they just basically went after, they're basically trying to destroy the foundation of our very country.
Wow. It's funny as we go through these, Father, because you could, if you didn't know this was written in 1963, a person could look at what's been going on and just say, well, we're going to write up, in the last 6 months to a year, what we've been seeing. And this is spelling it out in detail. The fact that this came out, in 63, well, that's when it was read, is just, it's unbelievable, because so many of these things we're just used to them. I mean, that's been going on. Yep, that's been going on. And then this one here, belittling all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history. We're rewriting history. We've got a 1619 program, I think is what it was called. I forget what the year is now.
Yeah, and shame on you for being patriotic, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Here's one I found interesting: discredit and eventually dismantle the FBI. Well, that one didn't quite happen. Although they did kind of take it over, it seems.
Exactly. Yeah. They found their useful, Yeah.
But there's a couple of here that again, we're seeing, like, as just to speak to Doug's point about, you swear they just got done writing it this year, transfer some of the powers of arrest from the police to social agencies. We've been hearing that in spades. We need to defund the police and just put social workers out there, treat all behavioral problems as psychic disorders, which no one but psychiatrists can understand. Which actually now they just say that the person committing the crime is actually the real victim, is usually what they say.
Yeah.
Here's a whopper. So number 40, discredit the family as an institution.
Yep.
Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. This, I think, needs some serious unpacking. Obviously, the promoting of promiscuity. In fact, that's the real issue about abortion. I always tell people, look, you're not going to get rid of abortion until you get rid of the spirit of fornication. And you're not going to get rid of the spirit of fornication until people start fulfilling the obligations of the first commandment first. So, but that all being said, this is one of these things where it was the Freemasons ultimately, who are, of course, the communism is their brainchild. It was the Freemasons who introduced no-fault divorce into this country, back in the day. And so they were the ones that first started eroding that. And Our Lady at Quito, Ecuador predicted it. She said that the Freemasons in the latter part of the 19th and 20th centuries would seek to undermine the family, or she might have said marriage, but undermine marriage in, during that time frame in which we actually began to see. But discredit the family as an institution. So we saw a little bit of this surfacing during some of the riots and stuff like that. And I think it was even on BLM's website at one point where they basically wanted to tear down the traditional family structure. They actually stated that particular position. So you actually saw that the family was discredited. So there's that particular aspect to it. But then the other thing to it was, and this is something which is slowly coming out, which is that the purveyors of feminism in this country were ultimately communist, financially backed and financially promoted. And that was the communists who really started pushing feminism in this country in order to tear down the fabric of the basic family structure and unit. And so because they knew once you could strip men of the family as the father and husband as the head of the household, etc., and also once you got the woman out of the house by telling her that she needs a career, she's only going to find a fulfillment in a career, she can't get it at home, etc. Once they gutted the family structure, then what happens is that everything in the society morally begins to break down, because it's precisely within the family that the morals are taught to the children. And so once you get the children away from the family or from the parents, and then you take the wife out of the home because she's the one that's going to be teaching it most of the time, then by that time the children are easy prey.
There's one more I'd like to hit for sure here, Father, but and this one during COVID, and then the George Floyd riots, and now we're seeing all kinds of protests. It's like it's commonplace. It's like you do this, but here it is, number 42. Create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition, that students and special interest groups should rise up and use united force to solve economic, political, and social problems.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just being encouraged. That's what I said, that you saw political parties actually incite these mainly students to riot.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
and I think it's that create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition. When you listen to these people, it's mostly a peaceful protest, putting that all aside. But even when they would kill people, we just saw it, in fact, this week when that one police officer in Ferguson actually he's still in the hospital trying to recover from a protest that he was trying to police down there. The protesters basically come out and basically want to say that, well, first of all, it was the police fault, okay, that you're basically causing this trouble. But then the other part of it was then they also would basically tear down the police, say it was their fault, and that that it's legitimate for these people to be burning down our cities because of the fact that they're victims.
Father, I'm curious your thought on this idea of special interest groups rising up. Now we've got a presidential candidate who, during the BLM riots, said, "Yes, these riots are happening. Yes, they will continue, and they should."
Yeah.
And she was very clear about that. That's all the audio or the video is out there of all that, or the audio is out there of that. We're in a place now where, what in the world does the average person think, and what does the average person do? I mean, this is unspeakable this is at this level, everything we've just read through here, and we're hearing this from presidential and vice presidential candidates. What hope do you have to give to the audience about a response to all of this? Because everything we've gone through, like, I don't know about the internationalize of the Panama Canal. I mean, has that happened? That's number 44.
Yeah, it was actually Carter sold it.
Okay.
Give it back to Panama, and now China's running it.
Yeah, that's interesting that would be on their list. That was just kind of abstract. That now we're going to the Panama Canal for some reason. Can you explain why that would be a big deal?
Well, the part of the argument that he gave for giving it back is the fact that most of the shipping now had to go down around the Cape because of the fact that the ships had gotten too large for the Panama Canal. And so, that's true in part. But the fact of the matter is that by giving it over to Panama and then they just turning around and giving it to China to basically operate, basically means it's out of the control of the United States. So if we ever go to war and we need to make use of it to get some of our smaller ships through there and that type of thing, they're not going to be able to do it. They're going to have to go down around the Cape. Right. So there's a number of different aspects to that one. That is it. I think it was one of those things that most people were just kind of miffed because so many Americans, lost their lives and went down there and did serious hard work to make that thing possible. Right. But I think in the end, and so I think but I don't think people realize strategically it was a bit of a problem. Just a couple of others here. 41, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of the parents. It takes a village, we're told. Right. So attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to suppressive influence of parents. So parents, again, this is attack of the family structure and that type of thing. And that's something that we're actually seeing. And this is also one of the ways that we're seeing this indirectly is, for example, now if like, for example, in Canada, if your kid has gender dysphoria, then as a parent, if you try and get the kid help or basically won't let the kid transition, then they'll take your kid. So I think that this is one of the things, one of my complaints about the government is, people ask me, can the government ever take your child? I'm like, yeah, they can, but there has to be a proportionate grave cause. So, for example, if the parents were, brutally abusing the kid, and every time he went to school, he was bruised from head to foot, yeah, obviously the state can step in. But from that, so it's always the exception. They try and create a rule. So what happens is, okay, yeah, you have that once in a while, but that doesn't mean, therefore, that the state can come in and intervene in any parent's decision about how their children are going to be raised and things of that sort. So I think we saw a lot of problems along that line.
Well, and I'm sorry, real quick, Father, on that one too. That's been coming up a lot more, even with the states that are putting laws in place that if a parent does not acknowledge the child's preferred pronoun or preferred gender,
right,
that's another area that they've taken it to that extreme, and that's become widespread, and it's creating a lot of fear among a lot of parents too, is it not?
Yeah, I think it is. So anyway, to get back to answering your question, I think as far as, where's the hope in all this?
Yeah.
Well, the first part about it is the people that are going to listen to this, when they read through this, first of all, they're going to be shocked that this was all laid out long before, because 63 was just when it was read. Who knows how long this thing was in place? In fact, if I remember right, I think they said that it originally came out in like 1945 or something like that. Don't quote me on that. It's 43, 45 around time frame is when the actual list actually had come out. But then, maybe it's 45, 47, somewhere around in there. But anyway, the fact that when they read this, there's like, the fact that they would recognize these things makes them realize, well, then I'm just not out of my mind that I'm seeing there's something wrong here.
Right.
And so there can be at least some relief in the fact that, okay, look, I'm not crazy. This is what I've actually seen. This is what's actually going on. And of course, here, what they do is, one of the things that we've progressed actually beyond this in certain respects. The fact that, that we have the whole transitional stuff going on right now, the tranny stuff going on right now, would have never have been even envisioned by these people, because it would have just been seen way far out there. But that's the thing about communism. They're going to keep going as long as they can keep going in order to cause this division and difficulty. But I think the other part of it is, so there's, and so we've kind of progressed beyond that. On the other hand, so just knowing it is important, knowing that there's other people that recognize it and you're not the only one, because one of the most powerful and effective things that communists do is they'll take the minority position and plaster it all over the mainstream news media and flood everybody with the idea, so that it looks like everybody else thinks this, and I'm the only guy, or one of the few people that doesn't think this. And that is just not true. Most people realize this stuff is insanity, right? It's just simply not true. And so I think that what you see is that, okay, so there's more of you out there than you realize. So there's that particular aspect of it. The other part of it is true is Our Lady already told us. So she said that, that Russia would spread its errors, etc. And we know this was going to happen, but she also predicted that there would be an era of peace, right? So Christ in 1929 appeared to Sister Lucia and said that by the time the Holy Father does the actual consecration, it will be too late to avert these things. So Our Lady already said, this is what's going to happen. In the United States, we are not immune from it. In fact, I think the United States and Europe are the primary areas of attack of the communists, because they know if they can take those two, the Europe down, and they can take the United States down, that's it. They have hegemony pretty much worldwide. So they want to take that down. But Christ said in 1929 that in the end, the Holy Father would consecrate the Russia, but that also means that because of that, eventually God will intervene, precisely because of the fact that he's not going to tolerate this forever. I mean, because communism is, in a certain sense, the symptom. I mean, this is just me kind of on my platform, but it's the symptom to our moral and spiritual degeneracy. And so once I think morally and spiritually, if God intervenes and then people get their act together, you're going to see all this stuff just swept aside as just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people will wake up is
Right.
what we're hoping. You know, you think about this, Father, and
So what you're telling me is that they'll truly be woke?
exactly, the right woke. But you think about all this and you watch it go around, and one of the things that I think about, Father, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, is that through everything that we've been through, especially it's ramped up in my estimation in the last 5 years. Again, we've had pagan idols, we've had a virus, we've had riots, all kinds of stuff that's gone on in the last 5 years. I just feel like it's just been like somebody took their finger out of the dike, and it started just flooding in. But and one hopes too that when it gets really bad, that people start to wake up. But here's what I noticed, and I'd like to get your opinion on it, is that people I know and you can kind of tell that they're tuned in or they're well connected to the divine life. They're living a holy life. They're trying their best to stay as close to God as they can. They believe in the supernatural power of grace. Those are the ones that, as all this stuff was trying to deceive us and trying to, lie, cheat, and steal their way in, they were the ones that went, wait a minute. And of course, you lead the way in what I'm talking about here. But isn't there a truth in that, Father? And that's really why, too, I want to pour more into helping us all become spiritually strong. But when we're near to God, it's harder for evil to pull the wool over our eyes, and you have a sense of what the evil's up to. Is that? Would you say that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think there's two reasons for that. One is the body of the doctrine of our faith gives us a set of principles by which we can judge these matters, right?
Right.
So we simply know that promiscuity, from what we know from our faith, is bad, that divorce is bad, that
abortion's bad.
Or abortion's bad.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there's that. The body of doctrine then becomes the foundation for, if we hold on to what the church has always taught, then it can be the principles which guide us through this process. But then the other part, which is, of course, faith, obviously believing in them, is also the light. But then the other thing is, too, is when people are trying to lead a good life, which is to your point, Father, what the principal effect of actual grace is to enlighten the mind and strengthen the will. And so people who are trying to live lives of grace, God is going to be giving them the grace to see these things in order for them to be able to avoid the pitfalls.
Right.
Yeah. So, Father, I like what you said earlier about the hope. There is a hope in realizing that you're not alone, and the fact that there are a lot of people out there that actually have been seeing this unfold. And it's gotten to a point where you can have family conversations with people. And there was a time when people would say, "Oh, you're crazy. This isn't happening. This isn't happening." Right. And we're pretty much vindicated when it comes to that, because we're seeing it all over the place. The fact that the Olympics had an issue with this transgender boxer, I find it one of the most amazing places of our society, that the sports world, which is so bent on the highest degree of competition, would get caught up in this and justify this kind of transgender stuff, which is so clearly even testosterone levels and so forth.
Right.
Does this just not speak to a certain degree of Diabolical disorientation, I think Sister Lucia said we would go through. Do you see that as being part of what we're seeing around us?
Yeah, I think it's yes. I think it's threefold. One, back to what Father said, people who aren't living their lives of faith are going to be more or less likely to be able to see these things.
Right.
The second, because they're not going to have the grace to see it. The second part about it is the diabolic in disorientation. So the demons are actually pushing people and making people wanting to think that these things are actually good and wholesome or what have you, or just that, that we can't, it's bad, to oppress people by telling them that they can't go by their preferred gender or what have you. But then the other component to this, I think, has to do with something which I've been talking a little bit more lately about, which has to do with St. Thomas's discussion of how the natural law becomes occluded. The occluded means clouded to where people can't see, and they start judging things falsely and wrongly regarding what's morally right and wrong. And he says it comes from one of two sources, either sin, which the world is just rife with sin, or bad formation. And that's the whole point of the communist thing, is that we're seeing what we're seeing now among the youth, not entirely, because there's some youth that are quite impressive and give me a lot of hope that, okay, we got some people coming up that are going to be solid. But by and large, their formation is so bad, they can't see how this stuff is bad.
Right.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Father, before we end here, I'd just like to get your opinion on this, that we're called to be courageous, and red or white martyrdom, we have to just accept that.
Right.
What I struggle with, Father, too, is just even at the highest echelons of our Catholic church, it just seems like there's not that kind of courage that you'd hope, that we can speak up, we can speak out, and we have this recent phenomena of censorship, of cancellation, of all kinds of things for anybody who dares speak about like what we talked about tonight. That's one of the things that we've tried to do, and you're leading the way. Thank you for your ministry. And I see it on social media all the time. Well, what does Father Ripperger have to say about this?
Well, recently I had to tell people, look, I am not a source. I only use the sources.
You're my source.
I tell people, look, I go and I get the tradition, to the saints and the theologians from the past.
You have a passion for truth, and that's a heart of love like I've never experienced before, and it's what I'm talking about, Father, is that there's some people that can't sit by and watch the wolves devour the sheep, and that's what's happening right now. And yet it seems like the leaders of the sheep won't allow that right now, and it's just disheartening. But we have to be courageous, and we have to be willing to accept that white martyrdom, maybe even a red martyrdom. Wouldn't you say, Father?
Yeah, I think that's actually true. I mean, any priest that is, unless you're in some very rare circumstances, any priest who is Orthodox, loves the Catholic faith, wants to preach it, wants to help those under him save their souls, is simply going to be under attack.
Yep.
On the other hand, it's how he's going to work out his salvation. It's how he's going to become a saint. And it's also, those priests, though, when you come across them, as you know, Father, it's such a breath of fresh air and insanity that you just, you feel like, okay, things aren't as bad as I thought they were. But on the other hand, I think it's also one of those things that we just have to realize that despite how bad all these things actually are happening, the hope in all of this is that we do know, because Our Lady predicted all this stuff bad was going to happen. It's happening. So we know she told the truth on that. But then that also means the truth on the fact that there is going to be, an era of peace. There is going to be these things that are going to be good. So I think that with the young priests, though, and especially the bishops, even among the bishops, when you see a solid bishop, it's just, there's a joy that you have just in seeing.
Well, Father, I think that's our time for tonight. This has been so enlightening, and it came at the perfect time. We have a rough couple, 3 months ahead of us, and we've got to do everything we can to be enlightened. And I thought this went a long way. I hope a lot of people watch this. Father,
real quick, I would just throw in there too. I hope anybody still watching, paying attention, you share this with people, please. because as Father Ripperger, you mentioned at the beginning, a lot of people don't even know that this exists. They have no clue that this document, that this formulated plan has been in the works for decades now. Yeah. And we still can do something about it with prayer and with proper appropriate action, especially as you mentioned on the local level, that we're taking the steps necessary to vet people and put people in positions of power and leadership that actually will pay attention to what is godly. And we've got to do that. We just have to do that. And we can do that. We have to find hope in that too. Like you said, the federal level, that's a whole nother, enchilada to talk about. But when it comes to the local levels, we've got to be involved in this. So please, people, share this with other people so people can know that this list exists of this whole strategic move to undermine not just America, but everywhere else in the world too. And just want to encourage people to not take this lightly.
And one more shout out for the 54-day Rosary Novena for our nation. It starts August 15th, this Thursday. And please, we'll put a place to sign up for that in the comments below. United in prayer. There's strength in numbers, but an incredible strength of numbers of believing Catholic Christians who believe in the power of supernatural grace and the powerful influence our Blessed Mother has. So please, 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 I think this is the most important time in all of history for us to pray. So please plan to join us. Father, could you close us with a prayer?
Sure. Just one last thing, to throw a pitch in here. I did do they're two long sections on communist psychology, which are on my YouTube channel. Okay. So if people want to get a better sense of how to pick this stuff out, how communists work psychologically, they can read those or watch those. So,
okay.
Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendit super vos sit manet semper. Amen. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you very much, Father. Good to have you.